Hello traders, welcome to our weekend analysis, weekend update, just to wrap up of what had happened this week. Now I apologize for the delay for this video. Right now it's Saturday morning already. Took a long nap yesterday. I was about to wake up in the afternoon, but just basically slept all the way until midnight. Had a wonderful feeling, but that's the reason I forgot about this video. So nevertheless, let's get into it. So this week, as I mentioned in our Monday weekly video, saying that it will be still a geopolitical based week, and that means the geopolitical events will take more dominance over the economic side, and that was exactly the case. Turned out, although we did have few indicators, economic indicators, but generally speaking, what's driving the market had been once again from the geopolitical side. So for British pound, it was a British pound week just because we had the pound CPI. Let me refresh this so you can see the result. We have the pound CPI, we have the employment data, and we also have the retail data. So beginning of the week, as we can see from the cable chart, we did have this gap down. Okay, we did have this gap down, and the following day, the CPI was also in line, right? It was not particularly good or bad. As you can see, we had 3%, which is still same as previous one. So I would say the market is still kind of clueless for British pound to a more negative side, but things start to change throughout the week when the job data was much better, when average earning actually raised higher, 2.2%, and climate change also dropped. Unemployment rate was the same. So again, looking at all the labor market data nowadays, you do have to pay more attention to the average earning, just because that's what's gonna cause the inflation. And although we are lower than the last time, but beating the expectation. So 2.2%, and that's why the market has a fresh new expectation. Then the retail was also a pretty good number. Consider last time was minus 0.7. So all this had fueled up the sentiment for British pound. And moreover, in the geopolitical side, it seems that Prime Minister May, we had a rumor that she is interested to increase the fee that she's about to pay to the Eurozone. But again, this kind of rumor, or even it's a fact, it's just very volatile. So the reason for cable to pretty much fill up the weekend gap and was pretty much an uptrend was not only because all the good news from British pound, was also because the negative news from US dollar. So don't forget, if you're trading currency, it's always a pair, and you have to look at two currencies in order to understand the correlations. What happened to US dollar? As you can see from the beginning of the week, basically it's a continuation of downtrend. So US dollar, as I mentioned, we don't really have much indicator. Yes, we did have the CPI. That's something more important, and the CPI was actually not bad. Not bad, was in line for core and headline CPI. Retail was a little bit lower for the core, but the headline was higher. But what driving the US dollar this week had been the tax reform bill, and there was no surprise that the House of Parliament, the House passed the tax reform bill. Now, although that seems like a good news, but you have to understand, as I kept stressing out, kept mentioning, emphasizing for many videos, is that it's not about the fact, it's about the expectation and the reaction to the fact. That means if a certain thing has been expected already, then if the outcome is as expected, you're not going to see too much of a movement after that. And that was exactly the case for US dollar, because the tax reform did get passed in the House, but that was expected. Then what's dropping the US dollar is once again the Russian Gate investigation. So you have these two compound effect. First is you have a slightly better outcome and indicators for British pound throughout the week, and you also have a more negative outcome for US dollar throughout the week, and that's why cable went up. The same thing for euro dollar. Euro is really a big winner, euro dollar, for this week. Really from beginning of the week, we just keep climbing up. And the same thing, there's no real news and catalyst for euro, but there's really negative news for US dollar, mainly from the Russian gate investigation. Especially right now, they have had the subpoena. That means now it's more of a big deal. They are going to they escalated, basically. The whole thing has escalated. So we'll see what happened next week. But because next week, between now and after the Thanksgiving, we're not expecting any new updates for the tax reform bill, because right now it goes to the Senate, and the voting will only happen after Thanksgiving, which is, I think, next weekend or the end of November. When is the Thanksgiving, actually? US Thanksgiving. Okay, November 23rd. Yeah, so it is next week. Okay, next weekend. So that means we don't expect too much geopolitical updates from the tax reform next week. That means what's going to drive the market will be this Russian gate investigation. And more often is that it's pretty much going to be a negative sentiment. But we will see what kind of indicator for US dollar that we have next week. Okay, let's keep going. So euro, again, not much happening, but as I mentioned in the beginning of the week, euro is a really good counter currency to buy, especially when you have a negative sentiment for US dollar. Okay, because that's the most traded pair. Other than that, talk about Aussie. Not much happening in Aussie. Look at the commodity. It's really, people might say it's a downtrend, but it's really just a retracement if you're looking at this. So not much going on. The oil market is still well supported. So for Aussie, the Chinese data right here was all in line, a little bit upset. Other than that, the wage price index, that's the one that maybe caused Aussie to drop this week as well. Now, if you look at, don't look at Aussie Newsy, right? Because Newsy is even worse this week. And the reason Newsy is worse, as I mentioned, Newsy pretty much is going to be a negative currency for at least the next couple months. And the biggest reason, as I mentioned, is because the Liberal government. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Liberal Party. Just the reason that it's very new. And that's the first reason. Second reason is a coalition. So it's not really about the Liberal Party. Also, they have a nationalism party within these two parties to forming the big party to be the government. So it's just a lot of uncertainty over the country. On top of that, the central bank is still very dovish. The monetary policy is still very loosened. So we don't really expect anything drastically to change Newsy. And that's why the Newsy, you might have occasionally day or two that's pretty good. But in a swing trade perspective, it's still looking to the downside. If you look at Newsy CAT, continuation of dropping. And that's pretty much for Newsy. Now for Aussie, let's see if I can get a chart here. I'm not sure if this thing works in the weekend because the market closed. Let's see. Okay, we're fine. All right, so let's take a look at Aussie dollar. Okay, so you look at that. Regardless, oh, this is 8 hour. Let's go to it. Okay, so this week, obviously, you can just look at a trend. It's still a losing battle for Aussie. So regardless of the weakening of US dollar, Aussie is still losing more than US dollar. So really, the biggest loser is Aussie and Newsy. Now, CAD, on the other hand, also lose ground, but it's not too accurate because that's about Japanese yen. If you look at CAD yen, dollar yen, the reason yen had a winning streak maybe toward the end of the week It's because this Russian gate investigation, that's once again another uncertainty. Ahead of the weekend, a lot of people were trying to park their money in a safe haven currency. So this is one thing to understand. This is a very regular occurrence for Japanese yen pair, is that you might have a losing yen for the week, but you most often than that will have a recover. You will have people to buy in Japanese yen before the weekend, especially nowadays. Nowadays there's just so much chaotic events that is uncountable over the weekend. You might have a North Korean launch another missile. You might have another big news from Brexit. You might have another Russian gate investigation from Donald Trump and the White House. So all these things, another referendum from Europe, another country, another war from Russian, Middle Eastern, things like this. It's a chaotic world nowadays. So that's why Japanese yen, although, as I mentioned, it did lose a little bit favor just because it's so close to North Korean right now. But you only have these two choices, either Japanese yen or Swiss franc. So that's why you always see a little bit winning for Japanese yen ahead of the weekend. So that's what happened to yen, but not other than that, we don't have really internal news. And for newsy, we talked about that already. Now for CAD, again, the CPI came out this Friday, pretty much in line with expectation. We don't really have much change. The core is a little bit better, but other than that, I'll say it's a flat. Okay, as I mentioned, the central bank is not going to look at one indicator, one fundamental data to make their decision. They are going to look at a series of data, consecutive of data. So right now, I'll say this inflation still quite flat. If that's the case, then what's going to drive the Canadian dollar once again will go back to the oil market. The oil market this week, you have a little bit downside during the weekday, but it does end up higher. Let's take a look at the crude oil inventory this week. So the crude oil inventory was built this week. Now that was probably the reason why oil dropped. But don't forget, November 30, OPEC is going to have their last meeting for this year. At the meeting, they will decide whether they are going to extend the oil supply curve for 2018. Now, right now, the expectation is that they will extend the deal. If that's the case, of course, it's going to be good for the oil market. But you have to watch out, again, for the reaction. Okay, because if market already expected OPEC to sign a deal, and if they did sign a deal, then you wouldn't have too much volatility because the outcome had already been expected. On the other hand, if they do not sign a deal, then of course you're going to see a huge drop in oil. Hence, you're going to see a huge drop in Canadian dollar. So that's something to keep in mind. November 30, so most likely we might see some buying into oil and Canadian dollar ahead of this event. So maybe the last week of November, you will start seeing some buying, which we'll talk about that later at that time. So that's pretty much the main event really for this week. As I mentioned, it's kind of hard to just trade in the indicator nowadays just because the geopolitical is really uncertain. So you do have to watch out for that. As for next week, let's take a look at indicators. So next week, from there you have Draghi speaks. Now Draghi this week, he did have some hawkish comment, last week, and that of course has helped euro as well. But as I mentioned, really the big surge in the euro is really because the counterparty like British pound or US dollar had a lot of negative news. So really, it's not that euro is very strong in itself, but euro is neutral because the fundamental side of euro is indeed recovering well. The ECB is really, if you want to say, ECB is the only roadblock for euro dollar. So yes, if the ECB can turn a little bit hawkish, it will help euro. But what's going to help euro even more is if other currency drop, especially for US dollar and British pound. Monday, we're also going to see the monetary policy minute from Aussie. I don't really expect too much thing from Aussie right now, because the central bank is very clear about their future policy. Right now, they are in no rush to raise the interest rate, and that had put them in a more dovish position. Tuesday, again, you have RBA government speaks, and you have the inflation report hearing. Now, this will be important for British pound, of course, but don't hold your breath on that. That means that even if something very hawkish happening, things like that, still, what's going to drive British pound, in this month or next, or even the next 2 months, will be the Brexit. Don't forget the deadline is coming, right? The deadline is March 2018. So it's going to be very, very volatile for British pound in the near future. We really need to see exactly what's going to happen for the negotiation. Then Yellen will speak again. As I mentioned previously, we now know that Yellen is not going to be the chair anymore. That means her speech are not that important anymore, and that's just the nature of the market. She's going to be retired, then market will naturally pay more attention to the new chair, which is Powell, if he passed this Congress approval. Wednesday, you have all these are important data, but not really tradable. Another crude oil FOMC minute. Now FOMC minute again, usually it's very important, but right now the census is really high for December rate hike. It's pretty much a done deal. Okay, so very little thing will change that aspect. So once again, if you eliminate, if that part has been digested, then what's gonna drive the US dollar will, for at least for the next few weeks, will be this Russian gate and the tax reform, whether it's going to really become a law after the Senate either pass it or don't. You have the Aussie retail, and Thursday, a lot of PMI from Eurozone countries. Second estimate GDP, you have retail still from Canada, S&P speaks, and that's pretty much it. So to be honest, just looking at it in hindsight, I don't think any indicator is too important next week. I still think market will be heavily geopolitical influence. So it will be heavily traded around the geopolitical events, and that's what you have to watch out for. That's pretty much it. I don't really have much to say. If you are in my email subscribers, the current trade alert, that one is still alive. That's why I wouldn't make any new alert or any new video. I mean, unless I have a very good high quality trade next week. Otherwise, just watch out for that. Trade is still in. Other than that, pretty much what you see in the screen is either the trade I'm looking at or the one I'm already in. A lot of day trade, a lot of swing trade. So personally, I'm still very favored to buy Canadian dollar and US dollar. Now these two are still something I really like from the fundamental perspective. A very simple reason is that Bank of Canada and Federal Reserve really are the only two banks that is on a hiking cycle, right? It's very important to stress that cycle. That means these two countries, they hike interest rate, and they are most likely are going to do that in the near future, once or twice or more. And the reason is because they're hiking the interest rate due to the economic strength. Now you might say, oh, but Bank of England also hiked the interest rate. Yes, but they hiked the interest rate due to the depreciation of the currency. So it's a different story, and that's what the market had been expected right now. Had been general census is that they hiked the interest rate for Bank of England. They hiked the interest rate. It's a one-time deal. It's just removing the previous cut insurance. So they are not going to hike anytime soon. So if you're looking at a bigger fundamental perspective, really only central bank that's on a hiking cycle is Federal Reserve and Bank of Canada. And that's why that's the only two currency I'm really interested to buy in a swing trade perspective. That doesn't mean it's going to go all the way up. On the contrary, a lot of things will affect the currencies ups and downs. But for swing trade perspective, those are the good one. Another thing looking at will more in the pair perspective. That means will only be good to buy in a specific pair. And I also already mentioned euro dollar will be something interesting to buy in the short term. If we have a very weak US dollar, then euro dollar will most likely to continue to go up. British pound is something I'm looking to sell, regardless of all these ups and downs. In a bigger perspective, I just think it's still very volatile. It's still very uncertain for anybody or any big money to get into British pound. So it's still something I'm interested to sell. And for Aussie New Zealand, they both are bad, right? They both are weakening. But for me, New Zealand is something I'm also interested to sell, just because the fact the new government will take time for the market to get used to, and it will take at least a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And before that, the general census will still be quite negative for New Zealand dollar. Okay, so that's pretty much what I'm looking at. And next week, I'll see if we have any new updates. But as I mentioned, don't expect too much momentum coming from the fundamental side. I mean, the economic side. It will really come out from the geopolitical side. So once again, also just be careful. You only really have a couple weeks before the end of this year. So don't make anything. Don't over leverage, basically. Protect yourself because you might lose money, but it's different psychological feeling if you lose your money at the end of the year versus if you lose at the mid of the year. Right? It's just a human psychology. You want to have we always want to have a good start and good end, right? That's a human psychology. Also, you're looking in hindsight in an yearly perspective. Yes, it doesn't matter mathematically, but psychologically, however, that's what we are as a human. So beginning of the year and the end of the year, it's very important for you. And the reason is not because the percentage-wise, it's because the psychology. You do have to take that into the consideration. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this video. Once again, if you want to get the newest video update all the time, this Friday video is usually published to everyone, but Monday is only published on time for the email subscribers and free members. So if you want to get that, be sure to sign up for the emails. You'll also get a trade alert at least once a week. Okay. If you have any question, feel free to let me know. Thanks for watching. Have a great weekend. Bye bye.